Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Today, we're going to continue our discussion about colonization and exploration. So, let's get into it. So, we left off with the Spanish and the Portuguese and their conquest in the New World. They had been, and by they I mean the Spaniards, they had been establishing an empire in Latin America for quite some time, and some of that territory had moved up to North America as well. And so you have other European nations who want a piece of the pie. So you have a lot of different reasons why they would want this land. Number one, this is a review from last time. Number one, you have, and we talked about this last time, you have the growth of centralized nations during the Middle Ages. Remember, that was a time of a lot of chaos and a lot of changes. And so after the Middle Ages, you had these stabilized, very powerful governments. They formed afterwards. Another thing, remember the Crusades, they brought a thirst for Eastern goods. When people were traveling to different parts of the world, they came in contact with new things that they had never seen before. So the idea of going to a new place and coming in contact with new crops, new animals, and things like that really made people want to continue to explore. And then also, we talked about new Renaissance discoveries and ideas that made long distance travel possible and made it a lot easier. Remember, we talked about the astrolabe, we talked about the caravel, and improvements with map making. So, you had three major competitors. Sorry. You have England, France, and the Netherlands. So, first, you have the French. The French, they, at the beginning, they were first of all looking for the Northwest Passage. The idea of a Northwest sea route from Europe to East Asia dates back a very long time ago to 2nd century AD. So Europeans' interest, it actually came after the Ottoman Empire they had basically had a monopoly over major trade routes between Europe and Asia in the 15th century. So it had been believed for quite some time that there was a commercial route to the east by means of a strait. Remember, we talked yesterday about what a strait is. It is a kind of a skinny body of water. We talked about the Bering Strait. And they thought there'd be that route by the means of a strait, that narrow body of water through North American waters. And so, unfortunately, at this time, they didn't find the passage, and it wouldn't really be able to be traversed until the 1900s. So, instead, they began to explore the continent. So, you had an explorer who has a very long and very French name. We're just going to call him Robert de La Salle. Um, and he was best known for leading his expedition down the Mississippi River, and he claimed the region for France. And what was very interesting about him is that he was formerly a Jesuit priest, and he got so sick of the church that he decided to hop on a boat and go exploring, and he was really good at it. He explores Great Lakes, and so he was a very interesting guy. So he goes back to Louis XIV, who's pictured here. That's not LaSalle, by the way, for more money and boats. And he keeps on pushing on, and he keeps sailing down the Mississippi, naming territory Louisiana after Louis. And he just ended up having a very interesting life. In the end, he was shot and killed by his own men because they staged a mutiny. They were tired of all of his expeditions. He would lose money and lose ships and kept going back to the crown and asking them for money. So anyway, going along with this, the French efforts in the New World were interesting, actually, compared to other European nations. They weren't necessarily interested in farming, but they wanted to trade. Um, Europeans use furs in a variety of ways. They use them in many garments, especially those for people that were very wealthy. They were trimmed with fur of animals like foxes and other animals of the time. So beaver fur could be made into like these very fashionable at the time, like really high hats. And what was very interesting there is they could make so much money off of it. And pictured here, this is a type of independent entrepreneur. They're called and I always butcher this pronunciation, by the way, but they are the cueilleurs de bois. If anyone's French, I'm very sorry. I probably butchered it. I always do, and then I kick myself later. Anyway, so they traveled in New France and the interior of North America, and they liked to trade with the natives. And so it was a pretty lucrative deal. So here, this is showing and this is skipping way forward where we are, that by the mid 1700s, this is showing how much land and territory that the French had compared to the British and the Spaniards, and all that changes after the French and Indian War, but that's way down the road. So anyway, continuing along with the French efforts, what's interesting is with the French and the natives, it was based on mutual gain. Unlike the Spanish, the French did not arrive with large armies. They didn't attempt to enslave the natives. Unlike the English, the French didn't want to establish these large scale settlements. But in most, but not all cases, the relationship between the two, the French and the natives, was based on mutual gain. And the French, they gained access to natural resources like those beaver and fox pelts. And the natives, they got these really nice, high quality European goods that otherwise they would not have gotten before. So all of this helped to fund the founding of many North American cities. You have places like Montreal, Quebec, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, New Orleans. These all were French settlements to begin with. After the French are doing well over here and the Spaniards, King James decides he wants a slice of the pie as well. The unfortunate failure at Roanoke. There were multiple expeditions. So the first Roanoke colonists did not fare well. They suffered from dwindling food supplies and Indian attacks. And so in around 1586, they got back on a ship. They went to England, and that was actually captained by Sir Francis Drake, which is really cool. And so they try again. And as you all know, this one didn't go so well. So in 1587, they try to colonize again. They worked to make repairs. They built houses, and they want to settle in their new lives. So what ends up happening is they start to run low on supplies. And so Governor John White, he says, I'm going to go back to England and get more supplies. So he left, I think, 115 people behind, and he went to get supplies. So it was unfortunate timing that he went whenever he did, because England was at war, and he wasn't able to return until 3 years later. So came back, as you all know, same story, to Croatoan being written on the tree. No one there. He sailed down to the Croatoan Island, it's now Hatteras Island, to look for him. But he tried multiple times, and those trips, he couldn't get there because of storms, and it was unfortunate. And so what he did do was he left, I think, 15 men behind at the site where they were supposed to be. and they awaited to see if someone would come back. They never did. Eventually, those men that were left behind, they went back to England. So John White, and no one really knew what happened. There are a bunch of different theories. There are theories that, of course, that the natives killed them. That's one of the big theories. Not saying, of course, that happened. I'm just saying that, of course, that's one of the big theories. And what's interesting with this is that there was an attempt to settle before, like I said, but one of the reasons why they moved back is because, unfortunately, they had dwindling food supplies. Like I said, they were lacking food, and then there were a series of native attacks. So that's something to think about. And before John White had left to go get supplies, there had been another attack from Native Americans around a month before he left. So some people find that very suspicious. There's also an alien theory. There's a zombie plague theory because I'm not joking. There is a Harvard archaeologist who said that there was some evidence of cannibalism at Roanoke, but some think it's because of drought. And that was 100% factual, that it was the worst in, I want to say, 700, 800 years. It was the worst drought that they had had. So not a zombie plague, but maybe they were at the brink of, all of them dying. So anyway, there are so many different theories. Now, there is another attempt, and this one, spoiler alert, is difficult, but it goes better. You have the first permanent English colony is at Jamestown. So they set sail at late 1606. They get there and they are almost immediately attacked by natives. They eventually land on James River. They settled and named it Jamestown. So you have that founding of the first permanent English settlement. The first few years were an absolute nightmare. A lot of them died on the way over. Another had a shipwreck. There was malnutrition and disease. There were a lot of resources at the beginning, but the problem was a lot of the men that were coming over to work, they were not working class men. They were wanting to come over there to line their pockets, basically. So what's interesting is that you had a major leader in John Smith. John Smith was the person who said, if you do not work, you do not eat, and made those people get to work. Unfortunately, there was a time called the starving time during the winter of 1609 to 1610. There were 400 people in early 1609. It was down to 60 by the time the starving time was over because there was sickness and there was starvation. It got to the point where they started to eat. They had eaten all their food. Things were not growing. And they started to eat animals that they wouldn't normally eat. Horses, cats, dogs, rats. There was evidence of them eating snakes, things like that. And so, unfortunately, they started to eat other corpses. One man ate his wife and was executed. So things got pretty desperate. So, yes, John Smith, whenever he said, "He that will not work shall not eat." So what's important is that tobacco does end up saving the colony. It is the most important cash crop in the colonies. It becomes very popular in England. There's still that strife going on between the natives and the colonists. So there is a marriage of John Rolfe and Pocahontas. While she was very young, this was supposedly, she was kind of the the person in between the two to help keep the peace. So what comes next, and is something that you probably know hopefully the most about after civics and economics, or if you took AP Gov, is the House of Burgesses. So it's the first elected legislative assembly in the New World. It is obviously located in Jamestown in Virginia, and they actually have it in the choir area of the town's church. So I thought that was, it's pretty cool. What's pretty interesting is the king in England, James I. He actually resented the House of Burgesses. From all accounts, didn't really want them to have much of their own government. So Burgesses, actually, those are elected representatives. Those Burgess itself, it's an English word for citizens. Unfortunately, it's only white men who own a specific amount of property. Those are the only ones who are able to vote for Burgesses. Some of the laws that they made required tobacco to be sold for at least 3 shillings per pound. It's not too much. Shillings are currency, by the way. Another really interesting tidbit, they had, this was in some of their first sessions, they prohibited gambling, drunkenness, and idleness, and they made it mandatory that you observe the Sabbath. So they had a lot of different things going on. All right, so in September of 1620, during the reign still of King James I, you have a group of around 100 men and women. Most of them are members of this English separatist church known to everyone as the Pilgrims. They set sail for the New World aboard the Mayflower. 2 months later, they arrive on the shores of Cape Cod, and this is in present-day Massachusetts. So by late December, they anchored at Plymouth Rock, where the Pilgrims, they finally get their permanent settlement. And unfortunately, a lot like Jamestown, a lot of these settlers, they died pretty quickly in that first winter. But what was interesting is the ones that did live, they were able to secure different peace treaties with Native Americans that lived near them and have a pretty self-sufficient economy amongst themselves. So it was pretty cool. So they were followed by the Puritans pretty shortly after. They were another separatist group, and they felt that they needed to purify the Church of England. They believed that the Church of England was too similar to the Roman Catholic Church for what they wanted. And so there were certain groups of Puritans that moved to the modern day United States during this time. And what's interesting is the Puritans coming over. We'll be talking about the Puritans and that way of life later. But it does set the tone for different religious practices and social order, because we will talk about how a Puritan lives their everyday life. And the main thing that I do want you to take from this is that both of these groups they were looking for religious freedom. All right, and this is just kind of a little cheat sheet for you. Jamestown was founded for profit. They wanted to make money. New England, they were founded for religious reasons. Okay, so the Dutch. So I know some people are like, wait, what do you mean by the Dutch? What country are you talking about? So Dutch means people from the Netherlands. It's just a descriptive of the people who live there. So they actually, with Henry Hudson, he also was searching for the Northwest Passage, and to no avail. Unfortunately, he's the most successful person who didn't achieve what he wanted. So he looked for the Northwest Passage, didn't do so well, but he was one of the best navigators at the time. So what's interesting about him is he sails up the Hudson Bay and up to the Hudson River, right? And so he has, and even though he didn't find the Northwest Passage, there's more water named for him than any other human that's ever lived. So he didn't get what he wanted, but he's still pretty important. So the Dutch saw that the fur trade was lucrative, so they got on that. They decided that was probably the best way to make money. They allowed settlers from different places to come in, so the Dutch were pretty easy to get along with. Okay, and unfortunately, for the Dutch anyway, the British come in, and to keep it short and sweet, the British come in, they outnumber them heavily. They bring in their army and they force the Dutch out, and they rename New Netherlands New York. So, all right. That is all for this little PowerPoint. I hope you all have a fantastic day.